Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a really difficult subject, a deeply disturbing one. We're diving into the source documentation we have on the murder of 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez.
Yeah.
Our mission here is, well, it's to stick strictly to that documentation. We want to lay out the timeline, really map out the systemic failures that are described, and look at the legal outcomes for everyone involved.
Exactly. Just the facts as presented in the material we have.
It's heavy stuff, obviously. The goal is to understand how this could happen based only on these records.
Okay, let's try and unpack this.
Right, and sticking to the source is key. This deep dive aims to give you a concise, factual account of the murder itself back in 2013, but we're also going to spend real time on the factors behind it, the legal side, the societal context, the personal histories, all is detailed in the text we've reviewed.
Okay, so part one, Gabriel Fernandez himself. His life, even before the final horrific period, was defined by, well, instability, constant changes in who was looking after him. That's right. He was born February 20, 2005. His parents were Arnold Contreras and Pearl Fernandez.
And the documentation says, almost immediately, he wasn't with his mother. He was placed with his great-uncle, Michael Lemos Carranza, and his partner, David Martinez.
Yeah, and that seems to have been actually a relatively stable period for him. For about 4 years, he was with them.
4 years, okay.
But then, in 2009, there's a big shift. The source material states he was moved to live with his maternal grandparents.
And the reason given in the documentation for that move?
It's explicitly stated. It was reportedly because Gabriel's grandfather didn't approve of his great-uncle and his partner being in a same-sex relationship.
Wow. Okay, so even at 4 years old, major life decisions are being made based on family prejudice, not necessarily what's best for Gabriel.
It certainly appears that way from the records. It sets a pattern, doesn't it? External factors dictating his life.
And that pattern leads us to the final fatal shift, September 2012.
That's when he goes back to his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend at the time, Isaro Aguirre.
And the documentation makes it clear this wasn't a universally supported decision within the family, right? There were worries.
Oh, absolutely. The source mentions other family members voiced serious concerns. They pointed to Pearl's alleged history of neglecting her other children. Red flags were already there, apparently.
But despite those warnings, Gabriel, who was 7 by then, he moves in with them.
He does. And that move marks the beginning of the end, the last 8 months of his life, September 2012 to May 2013.
And those 8 months, the word abuse almost feels inadequate based on the details in the source. It was systematic torture.
Systematic is precisely the right word, according to the documentation. It wasn't just random anger. It was planned cruelty. Physical violence, yes, but also calculated psychological degradation.
Let's talk about the physical violence first. What specifics are laid out?
The records detail just horrific things, general beatings, of course, but also specific acts like being burned with cigarettes, with other heated objects, being shot repeatedly with a BB gun.
Shots with a BB gun. And the burns. These weren't accidental injuries.
Not at all. Yeah. And the autopsy findings later confirmed the extent of it. A cracked skull, multiple broken ribs. These weren't new injuries when he died. They were evidence of prolonged severe trauma.
So physical trauma over a long period. But you mentioned psychological degradation, too.
Yes, and this is perhaps even more disturbing, if that's possible. The abuse included forcing him to ingest things like cat litter, cat feces, spoiled food, even his own vomit.
Forcing a child to eat cat litter?
Yeah.
His own vomit. It's designed dehumanization.
Absolutely. And then there was the psychological torment. The records state he was often bound and gagged, forced to sleep locked inside a small cabinet.
A cabinet, like a cupboard.
Yes, a small, cramped space. And another detail that stands out, he was forced to wear girls' clothing.
Why? Did the documentation offer any explanation for that specific type of humiliation?
It did. Prosecutors later argued that this was linked to one of Aguirre's alleged motives. The records state that Aguirre believed Gabriel was gay, and this belief reportedly fueled some of the most specific and degrading abuse.
So homophobia was potentially a driving factor in the torture.
That's what the prosecution contended, based on the evidence presented. It suggests a targeted cruelty, not just random rage.
And perhaps the most chilling detail, for me at least, reading through this, his siblings witnessed this, and they reported.
They reported that Pearl Fernandez and Isaro Aguirre often laughed while they were abusing him.
Laughed. It suggests not just cruelty, but enjoyment, a complete lack of empathy.
A profound lack, yes. It points to a shared dynamic of sadism between them. And this relentless torture went on for 8 months. until the final incident.
May 22nd, 2013, the fatal beating, and the reason cited in the documents.
Reportedly, it was because Gabriel didn't tidy up his toys.
For not cleaning up toys.
That final beating left him unresponsive. The source material notes Pearl didn't call 911 immediately. It was hours later.
And when the paramedics arrived.
They found him naked, not breathing, covered in injuries, obvious signs of severe trauma. The broken ribs, the cracked skull, and yes, BB pellets were found lodged in his body under his skin.
It's just devastating. He was rushed to the hospital.
Okay, Antelope Valley Hospital first. He was declared brain dead there almost immediately. The damage was too severe.
And he died.
2 days later, May 24th, 2013, after being transferred to Children's Hospital, Los Angeles.
The autopsy conclusion.
Clear cut, according to the records. Death caused by blunt force trauma, but aggravated by neglect and severe malnutrition. It wasn't just the final beating, it was the cumulative effect of months of torture and starvation.
An utterly horrific end, which forces us, absolutely compels us to move to part 2. How did the system, the safety net, fail so catastrophically?
Because the documentation makes one thing incredibly clear. This wasn't a hidden tragedy. The system knew. It was alerted. Repeatedly.
Right. This wasn't a case of no one speaking up. People did speak up.
Exactly. And what's fascinating and frankly infuriating is looking at how the mandated reporting system worked, or rather, didn't work. It was activated. The initial alert came from the right place.
Who made that first report?
Jennifer Garcia, Gabriel's first-grade teacher at Summerwind Elementary School. As a teacher, she was a mandated reporter.
Let's just clarify that term, mandated reporter, for anyone listening who isn't familiar. What does the documentation imply that means in this context?
It means she was legally required, because of her profession, to report any reasonable suspicion of child abuse or neglect to the authorities. Usually that's Child Protective Services, or DCFS in this case.
And she did her duty. What triggered her first call?
Gabriel himself came to her. The records say he asked her if it was normal for moms to hit their kids with a belt, specifically mentioning being whipped. He even showed her bruises.
Oh my God, an 8-year-old asking that.
And Garcia didn't just make one call and leave it. The source material emphasizes she kept calling the child welfare hotline. She saw the abuse escalating. She reported a swollen lip, bruises, patches of missing hair, bald patches.
So she's doing exactly what she's supposed to do, escalating her concerns as the signs worsen.
Correct. But the system's response didn't escalate with her reports. And that's where we see the breakdown within the Department of Children and Family Services, the DCFS.
Multiple reports from a credible, mandated reporter, and the action taken was insufficient. What were the specific failures within DCFS, according to the documents?
Well, there are several key failures highlighted, big ones. First, despite Garcia reporting visible injuries, the source states that no medical assessments of Gabriel were ever conducted by DCFS or related services.
No doctor ever examined him as part of the investigation.
Apparently not. A proper medical check could have provided objective evidence of abuse, potentially overriding the explanations given by his mother.
Okay, that's failure number 1. What else?
Failure number 2 is almost harder to believe. When social workers did visit the home, and visits did occur, the documentation states they only spoke with Gabriel Fernandez.
They never talked to Gabriel. Alone.
Never interviewed him separately, according to the records. Standard practice in child abuse investigations is always to interview the child alone, away from potential abusers. That didn't happen here.
Why not? Did the social workers give a reason, documented anywhere?
The documentation suggests they accepted Pearl's explanations. She apparently attributed the injuries to Gabriel being clumsy, falling, or even self-harming in one instance. The records imply the assigned social workers, Stephanie Rodriguez and Patricia Clement, along with their supervisors, Kevin Baum and Gregory Merritt, minimized the severity in their reports.
Minimized or falsified? Because charges were eventually filed against them.
Yes, the charges included falsifying public records. The implication is that they altered case notes to justify not taking further action, specifically not removing Gabriel from the home.
So it potentially went beyond just poor judgment or negligence.
That was the accusation. And it wasn't just observers after the fact saying this. The source of material cites a legal scholar, Charlotte Hinkamp.
What was her assessment?
Hinkamp reviewed the case files and concluded there was already sufficient evidence of severe child abuse documented by DCFS themselves. Enough evidence, she argued, that they should have removed Gabriel from the home under existing child welfare laws. She found the failure to do so surprising, given what was in their own records.
Surprising feels like an understatement. So these failures led directly to charges against the 4 DCFS employees.
Correct. Rodriguez, Clement, Bohm, and Merritt were charged with felony child abuse and falsifying public records. A very rare step, charging social workers criminally in relation to a child's death.
But the outcome of those charges is really crucial for understanding systemic accountability, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is a key point legally. In January 2020, a California appeals court made a landmark decision. It dismissed the felony child abuse and neglect charges against all four.
Dismiss them. Why? How could they not be held liable for child abuse when their inaction arguably led to his death?
The court drew a very specific legal line. It ruled that their failure to perform their duties, their negligence in not removing Gabriel, did not legally constitute child abuse under the statute. They weren't the ones inflicting the injuries.
So the law differentiated between the perpetrators of the abuse, Pearl and Aguirre, and the system's failure to stop it.
Precisely. The court essentially said their role was investigative and administrative. While their failures might have been negligent, possibly even grossly negligent, they didn't meet the legal definition of committing child abuse themselves. They didn't have custody or inflict the harm directly.
That's a really fine legal distinction with huge implications.
Huge. It meant that, criminally, they weren't held responsible for Gabriel's death through the child abuse charges. The falsifying records charges were separate and continued for a while, but eventually those were also handled through diversion programs, meaning no felony convictions for anyone.
So ultimately, no criminal convictions for the systemic failures that allowed the abuse to continue.
Correct. Which raises massive questions about accountability for child welfare agencies. If criminal prosecution isn't the answer for this level of failure, what is?
And it wasn't just DCFS. The documentation also mentions law enforcement's role.
Right. It notes that 9 sheriff's deputies from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department faced internal discipline. They had also responded to calls or reports concerning Gabriel and apparently didn't investigate properly or failed to document concerns adequately.
So it truly was a multi-agency failure. Every layer of protection seemed to crumble.
That's the picture the documentation paints. Multiple opportunities, multiple agencies involved, and yet the system fundamentally failed to protect him at every turn.
Okay, let's shift now to part 3. Let's look closer at the perpetrators themselves. Gabriel Fernandez and Isaro Aguirre. Their backgrounds, as detailed in the source material, are quite different. Let's start with Pearl.
Gabriel Fernandez, born in 1983. Her background, presented extensively by her defense, is marked by significant trauma from a very young age.
What kind of trauma are we talking about?
The records describe an unstable childhood, an allegedly abusive and neglectful mother, a father who was incarcerated frequently, and substance abuse started incredibly early. She reported using methamphetamine and drinking alcohol from age 9.
Age 9? That's staggering.
It is. She dropped out of school in 8th grade. The documentation also includes reports of further trauma in her teenage years, including alleged rape and resulting suicidal thoughts. It's a history of profound adversity.
And this clearly impacted her mental and cognitive state as an adult.
Profoundly. According to the psychological evaluation cited, she was diagnosed with multiple conditions: depressive disorder, PTSD, a possible personality disorder. Critically, she was also diagnosed with a developmental disability.
How severe was the developmental disability?
The source mentions a specific cognitive test from 2011. It placed her verbal comprehension skills at the level of a 2nd grader.
2nd grade comprehension. That's a major impairment in understanding and reasoning.
Absolutely. And her defense psychologist, Dr. Deborah Miura, testified to that effect. She stated Fernandez was, and I'm quoting the sentiment here, virtually unable to use thoughts to guide her behavior and control her emotional reactions. The argument was she lacked the capacity for rational decision-making and impulse control.
So the defense painted her as severely damaged, almost incapable of acting differently.
That was the core argument. But importantly, the documentation includes conflicting information that complicates that picture.
How so?
While Pearl claimed many partners, including Aguirre, were abusive towards her, her own aunt and the aunt's partner disputed this. They alleged that Pearl was actually the abusive and controlling one in her relationships.
So maybe not just a passive victim of circumstances.
Possibly.
Yeah.
And there's corroborating evidence. The records mention she had pending charges for threatening to stab Arnold Contreras, Gabriel's father. That suggests a capacity for aggression and violence predating Aguirre.
And her substance abuse continued into adulthood.
Yes. The source notes she reported abusing opioids like oxycodone and Norco after Gabriel's death, suggesting ongoing issues. It's a complex profile. Victim of severe trauma and cognitive impairment, but also potentially an aggressor with a history of violence and substance abuse.
Okay, now let's contrast that with Isaro Aguirre. His background seems almost paradoxical, according to the
It
documents.
really does. Isaro Aguirre, born 1980. Educationally, there were some struggles he repeated. 2 grades, eventually dropped out. This might suggest a learning disability, though it's not explicitly diagnosed in the material we have.
But the paradox comes in with his work history, right?
Exactly. For 3 years, he worked at a retirement facility, Woodland Park Retirement Hotel. He was a caregiver and a driver.
A caregiver for the elderly.
Yes. And people who knew him there, including the executive director, testified during his trial. They described him completely differently from the person who tortured Gabriel.
What did they say?
The director called him a kind and gentle person. Staff apparently nicknamed him Shaggy. He was known for doing tasks like changing diapers for elderly residents, tasks requiring patience and care.
Kind, gentle, patient. It's hard to reconcile that with the details of Gabriel's abuse. Did the documentation offer any bridge between these two personas?
That was the million-dollar question at the trial. The defense strategy, led by attorney John Allen, leaned heavily on this dichotomy. They emphasized Aguirre had no criminal record before meeting Gabriel Fernandez.
How long had they known each other before Gabriel came to live with them?
The records state about 18 to 24 months. He started working as a security guard around October 2012, shortly after Gabriel moved in.
So the defense argued he wasn't violent until Pearl.
Essentially, yes. They tried to imply that Pearl was the dominant influence, the catalyst, perhaps, that turned this otherwise gentle man into a monster. They portrayed the violence as specific to that relationship, that environment.
But the prosecution obviously disagreed. How did they counter that?
They focused on the nature of the abuse, particularly the elements suggesting personal malice from Aguirre, like the forced wearing of girls' clothing and the alleged homophobic motive.
Right. That points to his own prejudice, not necessarily just following Pearl's lead.
Exactly. Deputy DA Jonathan Atami argued Aguirre was driven by his own evil, his own hatred, specifically citing the belief that Gabriel was gay as a key motivator for the torture. They presented him as the primary architect of the cruelty, regardless of his past persona or Pearl's influence.
So, 2 competing narratives. The corrupted caregiver versus the inherently sadistic abuser. A classic courtroom battle.
And a battle with the highest possible stakes, leading us into part 4. The legal process and the vastly different outcomes for Fernandez and Aguirre.
Okay, the arrest happened very quickly after Gabriel was found, May 23rd, 2013.
Yes. Initially, Pearl was arrested for felony child endangerment, Aguirre for attempted murder because Gabriel was still alive, though brain dead.
But once Gabriel died on May 24th, the charges escalated significantly.
They did. Both were charged with first-degree murder. And crucially, the charge included the special circumstance of torture.
Explain that again, the special circumstance of torture. Why is that wording so important?
It's what made this a capital case. It elevates the murder beyond simple premeditation. It means the prosecution alleges the killing involved the intentional infliction of extreme pain over a period for sadistic purposes, revenge, or extortion. Proving that allows them to seek the death penalty.
The death penalty. So, facing that, Gabriel Fernandez chose a different path than Aguirre.
She did. On February 15, 2018, she accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder with the special circumstance of torture.
In exchange for what?
In exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The deal guaranteed her a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, LWOP.
Life without parole. She'll die in prison, but she won't be executed. Did she say anything at her sentencing?
The records note a brief statement. She said, "I want to say I'm sorry for what happened. I wish Gabriel was alive. I'm sorry to my children, and I want them to know that I love them."
And that wasn't quite the end of her legal story, was it?
No. In 2021, she tried to get her sentence reconsidered. There were some changes in California sentencing laws, and she filed a petition.
What happened with that?
Judge George Lumley, the same judge who handled the original cases, dismissed her petition. He ruled the changes in law didn't apply to her circumstances, so her LWOP sentence stands firm.
Okay. So Pearl takes the plea, but Isaro Aguirre, he fights the charges.
He pleaded not guilty. His trial began in September 2017. The prosecution team, Jonathan Hatami and Scott Yang, clearly views him as the more culpable party, or at least the one they were determined to see face the death penalty.
What was the atmosphere like going into that trial, based on the documentation?
Intense. The source material notes that potential jurors were warned about the graphic nature of the evidence, the extensive internal and external injuries, and the potential length, estimated at 6 weeks. They needed a jury prepared for horrific details. Eventually, 7 women and 5 men were seated.
And the prosecution's case.
It was built on laying out the sheer brutality and duration of the torture. Hadomi famously called Aguirre pure evil in court. He argued the death penalty was the only appropriate response, saying it doesn't even compare to what he did to Gabriel. They presented all the grim evidence, the burns, the BB pellets, the forced ingestion, the testimony of the siblings.
And Aguirre's defense, what was their strategy against that onslaught?
Attorney John Allen stuck to the narrative we discussed. Aguirre, as a previously nonviolent person, the kind caregiver, corrupted by Pearl. They highlighted his lack of prior record, trying to plant doubt about whether he possessed the inherent malice required for the torture special circumstance or if he was acting under duress or influence.
Did it work? How long did the jury deliberate on guilt?
Not long at all, which suggests the evidence was overwhelming. Deliberations started November 14, 2017. They came back with a verdict the very next afternoon.
And the verdict was?
Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. And critically, the jury also found the special circumstance of torture to be true.
Which meant the trial moved to the penalty phase, life or death.
Exactly. This phase is solely about the sentence. The jury hears arguments for and against execution.
Was it a difficult decision for the jury?
The records indicate there was a brief deadlock. On December 12, 2017, they reported being stuck. But they were asked to continue deliberating, and the next day, December 13th, they reached a unanimous verdict.
The verdict was death.
Yes. The jury recommended the death penalty, and Judge Lamelli formally imposed that sentence.
So, Isaro Aguirre was sentenced to death. Where is he now?
He was initially sent to San Quentin State Prison's death row in June 2018. Later, he was transferred to the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, also housing death row inmates. He is legally sentenced to death.
But he hasn't been executed, and likely won't be anytime soon.
Correct. And this is a crucial piece of context. California Governor Gavin Newsom imposed a moratorium on all executions in the state in 2019. That moratorium is still in effect. So while Aguirre's sentence is death, there's no execution date set, and none will be scheduled while the moratorium holds. He remains on death row, but his execution is stayed indefinitely.
So the legal system delivered the ultimate penalty on paper, but politically its implementation is halted, which definitely shapes the legacy of this case. Let's talk about that in Part 5, the legacy and media reflection.
This case resonated far beyond Los Angeles, largely because of media coverage that highlighted not just the crime, but the systemic failures.
The big one being the Netflix documentary.
Absolutely. The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, released in 2020. It was a 6-part series directed by Brian Knappenberger.
And it didn't just focus on the trial itself, did it?
No, not at all. It spent a huge amount of time digging into the DCFS failures, the missed warning signs, the role of the mandated reporter, Jennifer Garcia, and the subsequent, ultimately unsuccessful prosecution of the social workers. That's what really brought the systemic issues to a massive global audience.
It made the bureaucratic failures as central to the story as the abuse itself.
Precisely. It became a case study in how child protection systems can break down. The documentation also notes other media reflections, less prominent perhaps, like an indie video game from Vietnam, Bad Parenting 1, Mr. Redface, loosely based on the case. It shows the story had a disturbing cultural impact internationally.
So reflecting on everything we've discussed, all drawn from this source material, what's the final thought we should leave the listener with, especially regarding those systemic failures?
Well, if we circle back to the legal outcome for the social workers, it really crystallizes the core dilemma. The appeals court dismissed the child abuse charges against them. The legal reasoning was that their failure to act, however negligent, didn't meet the criminal standard for inflicting abuse.
Right.
A crucial distinction legally, but maybe not morally or practically.
Exactly. And it leaves us with a really difficult question, posed implicitly by the documentation of this case. If criminal prosecution isn't the tool to hold system employees accountable for failures that contribute to a child's death, because the legal bar for criminal abuse is rightly focused on the perpetrators, then what mechanisms can provide meaningful accountability?
What prevents this from happening again if the individuals within the system aren't criminally liable for such catastrophic oversights?
That's the lingering question. Beyond criminal court, you have things like internal discipline, civil lawsuits, professional licensing boards, and perhaps most importantly, legislative and policy reform within child welfare agencies. The documentation of Gabriel's case forces us to ask if those mechanisms are strong enough or visible enough to ensure that such profound failures don't just get explained away as unfortunate outcomes of a difficult job.
It demands we look beyond the individual monsters and scrutinize the system that allowed them to operate unchecked for so long. A truly sobering thought.
Thank you for joining us for this very difficult but necessary deep dive into the documentation surrounding the tragedy of Gabriel Fernandez.